Replacing the old manual head on our 44-year-old sailboat with a new electric one has led me down an epic A leads to B leads to C string of events. Making room for a new pump meant moving the battery chargers, which meant moving some of the electrical wiring, which meant disassembling much of the portside interior. It's been a slightly chaotic couple of days, but after routing the cables and getting ready to secure them in place, I'm now almost ready to put my boat back together again. My name is Andy, and this is the story of one small ship. I've stuck most of the cabinetry in the pilot berth, but now I need to get underneath it to finish routing the battery cables, and since I need access to the entire boat for working, my only recourse is to shove everything in the cockpit. Luckily, the weather has been great over the last few days and is not looking likely to change. Well, that was fun. At least I have space to work here now, because now half the boat is in the cockpit. But the old adage, out of sight, out of mind, is coming back to haunt me now, because there are some things that I had conveniently forgotten about that I now need to address. You see, when I installed the heater last year, I failed to mention that there already was a heater on the boat. This is what I sometimes see referred to as a calorifier or a heat exchanger, but the long and short of it is that the coolant from the engine circulates through this unit and it converts the heat in the coolant into hot air. Now, the reason that I didn't include it in the video is that I wasn't sure what I was going to do with it. At first I was going to throw it away, and then I thought maybe it's a good idea with a redundant heat source in the boat. And then we decided to put in a hot water system, and so I think it's better to just remove it. I know what you're thinking. This vinyl looks horrible. And I thought so too, so I donned a full face mask and I spent an hour or so just cleaning up in here. It's certainly not a workable solution in the long term, but over the summer it'll have to do, and then I think we all know what my winter project is going to be. Yay. Well, I figured since taking apart things I previously put together seems to be the name of the game right now, I might as well just take apart the heating system too. I'm going to remove this Y connector and put in a straight piece and just join these two hoses together. And the heat exchanger, calorifier, whatever, I don't know what to do with it right now. I can remove it once the boat is in the water, so it's fine. For now, it can stay. The most pressing job is to route the cables, so that's what I'm going to do. So all of the notches are cut and the cables now go all the way from the battery compartment over to the pilot berth. And so I think it's time to glue the spacers down. Now the settee is 2 meters long and accounting for 15 centimeters at each end, dividing it for 7 spacers, we get about 30 centimeters per spacer. I think that's going to be fine. With 4 of these per spacer, and 7 spacers, that gives me 28 of these, and I bought 50, so I should have plenty for the rest of the routing as well. It's been a long day. At least in the end I got the pilot berth back together, so now I can shove everything back that I stuck in the cockpit. I didn't quite finish the routing of the cables under there. I haven't screwed them down with clamps, but that can wait. I need to remember that the real project is actually installing the electric head, and I haven't touched that in a week, so yeah, I need to focus on this area, just finishing up here so I can put the top back on and get on with the real project. I've mixed up a batch of epoxy with West Systems 403, and yeah, now I'm just gonna glue them down. Well, there we go. So tomorrow this should be cured enough that I can mount all the cables and then put the top back on. Right, I'm back after a good night's sleep, so now it's time to see if the epoxy has cured. But first I need to get rid of all this stuff. Well, it's still kind of soft, but it's been fairly cold, so that doesn't surprise me. It should still have cured enough that we can mount the cables on there. I bought 50 of these cable clamps and they were dirt cheap, but they came with these screws, and not only are they too big, they're also zinc plated, which is a big no-no on board a boat. So I bought some smaller stainless ones and I'm just going to throw these away. One of the quirks of the Ballad is that the batteries are located in the forward part of the boat, while the engine, alternator and electrical panel are all toward the aft. This means running at least 2 long, bulky cables all the way along the hull from the engine to the battery compartment. It's not an ideal situation, and I know some Ballad owners have moved their batteries aft. If I was switching to lithium, I might consider it, but we are still on a lead-acid setup, and finding room for 3 100 amp-hour lead-acid batteries in the aft section of the Ballad is not easy. Another option would be to switch to 24 volts to minimize losses in the cables. In any case, this system has worked well for 3 seasons now, with acceptable amounts of voltage drop, and so far it's not had any negative consequences other than the annoyance of having cables routed back and forth along the hull like this. Well, it's taken me an extra 3 days, but the rerouting of the electrics is finally done. The chargers are moved to this side, the cables are routed on this side. I replaced the connectors on some of the cables, especially around the engine, and I even managed to get this organized up a little bit. So here's the new setup. Here's the main fuse, and this side is connected to the consumer battery bank, and this side to the main breaker. Here is the common bus bar for all the negatives. This is the negative to the engine block, and this also connects to the consumers via a bus bar above the engine. This is the negative to the starter battery, and this is the negative to the consumer bank via this shunt which measures the current draw. This negative line is connected to this bus bar, which will host the negatives for the consumers in the V-berth and in the head. So this now connects to the tank sensor, and this will connect to eventually the lights in the head and V-berth, and also the pumps. These two fuses down here are the inputs from the charger. This is the input to the starter battery, and this is the input to the consumer bank. And those are connected to the charger on this side. The charging solution I've gone with aboard Marella consists of this CTEC DC-DC charger and this SmartPass unit, and together they act as one unit, where basically the input from the solar panels here and the input from the alternator down here will charge either the starter bank or the consumer bank, depending on where it's needed right now. So it's a very smart and simple solution. There are no buttons to press, there's nothing to configure. It just works, and it keeps my starter battery and my consumer bank charged at all times, either through the alternator or through the solar panels. The only major downside to these units is that they're not compatible with lithium, so if I decide to switch to lithium at some point, I'm going to have to replace the chargers as well. Well, this little excursion certainly took a lot of time that I don't really have. So I'm going to have to crack on getting this place tidied up, and then I can finally get back to installing the new head. Well, that took a little bit of time. As you can see, my hair is a bit shorter, and the boat is much tidier. So I feel really good about that, and I'm ready to get back to tackling the real project. So here we are in the V-berth area, and this is where the pumps are going to go. And I already mounted the seawater pump here. This is actually just stuck into two of the old holes that the freshwater pump was mounted on. And of course, I want to put the freshwater pump next to the seawater, just like this. Now, the problem with that is that this pump had a strainer on it, and of course I want a strainer on the seawater especially as well. And if we put these strainers in, then there's actually not enough room for the strainers and pumps and hoses to sit next to each other, much less being able to actually open and clean the strainer when you want to, so that's not going to work. So what I ended up doing was I got this inline strainer. I got two of these inline strainers, and I'm probably just going to zip tie those to the bulkhead. But like I said, this is going to be quite a puzzle, and I'm not sure how to solve it quite yet. I'm going to have to take some time and move things around. So after a bit of struggling with this, I managed to get the strainers and the through hull connected via these hoses to the pumps, and I got the expansion tank back up on the bulkhead here. I've got good access to the strainers so that I can open them up and service them and clean them, and I've got good access to the valve for opening and closing for seawater intake. And so yeah, I think it's not the most beautiful solution, and I'm probably going to get back to it at some point to fix this up, but for now it's, as they say, good enough for government work. So the next step is to take this hose and get that over to this side of the bulkhead and up around the ventilated loop here and back down to where it's going to connect to the head. So when I'm routing this hose, I want to be a little bit future-proof, because I know that I'm eventually going to replace both the freshwater and seawater hoses with rigid PEX tubing that's going to run the length of the boat. And so I want to figure out where that's going to end up, and that's probably going to be around here. So I probably want to take up a hole in the bulkhead around here, and that's going to line up well with the bulkhead on this side where the ventilated loop is going to go. Now, this is only here temporarily. I just mounted it here in a hole that was already there, but I think I want it further in, next to the holding tank where I can hide it. And so if I take up the hole here in the bulkhead, then the hose is going to come up here, and it can swing inwards and back down and slope gently down until it meets the head. So I've moved the vented loop in and just temporarily mounted the hose here. And now I just need to drill a hole for the hose right here, and then put a 90-degree bend on there and stick it through, and that should be perfect. Well, I cut all the hoses to length and dry fitted everything, but there's one more thing we need to do before we can call this installation complete, and that is to put in the new deck fitting for the pump out. And to do that, I need to pretty much disassemble everything that I put in here, so it's going to take me a little time to do that. But while I'm doing that, Lena is working on washing the hull, so that will be ready for priming and anti-fouling soon. And yeah, after that, we can pretty much just lock down the new through hulls and fittings, and we're ready to splash the boat. But first, I need to tear all of this down, take out the holding tank, and find where to put the new hole for the pump out. The head area has been cleared out, and the new deck fitting is going to go right up there. And on this edge here, that's the tow rail, and so we want the fitting to sit a little bit out from the bulkhead and a fair bit from the tow rail so it doesn't get in the way. So there's the vent in the head, and I know that these bolts is where the bulkhead is, and there's the old deck fitting. And I think I want to put the new one just horizontally out near to the edge, and a bit in from the edge and a bit in from the bulkhead, so probably just horizontally out from the old one. So I'm going to drill an exploratory hole from the inside out, and depending on where that ends up, I'll figure out where to put the hole from the top side, and then we'll start drilling. Well, I can see daylight, so I definitely came through. That's a tiny little hole right there. The fitting is 2 inches in diameter, and I checked that there's two inches of clearance down there, and there definitely is, so. That looks pretty dang good. So Andy went and done a boo-boo. When I drilled this hole, I drilled it too close to the holding tank, so now when I put the fitting in, it bumps into the holding tank. So obviously I want to go and move the hull, which I can't do, but this part of the deck has a sandwich construction, and so of course I want to widen the hole, make it bigger, and fill it with epoxy before I drill out the real hole, so that water doesn't seep into the sandwich construction once we put the fitting in there. Measure twice, cut once, kids.
That could have been a lot worse, and I'm really happy I forgot about the sandwich construction and didn't drill the hole bigger from the start. In this case, 2 wrongs did make a right, but I really should have been more thorough while I was taking measurements. If you enjoyed this episode, you can help us out by leaving a like, it really does make a difference, and press subscribe and click the notification bell to follow us on our journey. You can also follow us on social media, check out the links below for that, and thank you so much for watching. Fair winds.